So, this is the part 2 of our discussion uh, on multiplier in the simple Keynesian model. In part 1, we have already discussed how multiplier works, how autonomous expenditure multiplier works. We discussed it, how income changes with in relation to change in government expenditure. So it basically in part 1 we discussed if the government raises its expenditure, how it's going to change the income and how in what multiple the income is going to change. So and that was relevant for any autonomous component. We discussed it in the context of government expenditure, but you can use the same logic for investment expenditure, for autonomous consumption expenditure, or any autonomous component in the aggregate demand, aggregate demand uh, items, whatever aggregate demand items we have. So any increase in any autonomous expenditure item will lead to a multiplier effect, will lead to an increase in income by some multiple. That is autonomous expenditure multiplier. If you remember the context of that, remember when we were discussing, I mean, why the government was eager to raise government expenditure. The context was we were talking about an economy which was facing aggregate demand problem, which was in recession or maybe in slowdown or whatever be the case. Main problem was there was no supply side bottleneck. That was our assumption. The only problem was that there was not enough demand in the economy. So the government was trying to increase demand, infuse expenditure through increasing its expenditure. So the main purpose of that policy was to increase increase demand because because as Keynesian economics, as this is a Keynesian model here, because there is no supply side constraints or supply side bottlenecks, any increase in aggregate demand will raise aggregate supply. So, but if this is true, then think of a situation where the government, instead of increasing expenditure, can cut tax also. Because remember, the main objective is to increase aggregate demand. And we know that consumption is a function of disposable income. So if consumption is a function of disposable income, what is disposable income? Disposable income is basically YD. This is basically equal to whatever is your income minus tax. So if the government decides to cut tax, if it reduces tax, so that means your disposable income will increase. So just an example, if your income is 100 rupees and if you are paying 20 rupees as tax, then your disposable income currently is equal to 80 rupees. Now if the government decides to cut that tax from 20 rupees to 10 rupees, then your disposable income is now at 100 minus 10, that is equal to 90. So there is an increase in disposable income from 80 to 90. What are you going to do with that increase in your disposable income? There are two possibilities. You can consume more, you can save more, or you can do both. So if you consume more, or at least with this additional 10 rupees increase in your disposable income, if you consume a part of it, then that's going to, in any case, that's going to increase the consumption expenditure of the economy. Now, if consumption expenditure increases, that means aggregate demand of the economy is basically increasing. So then we are in a situation where as aggregate demand is increasing, aggregate supply will increase, and as aggregate supply increases, then that will generate another round of consumption increase induced effect, just as it was in the case of government expenditure multiplier. So this is how it works. So instead of increasing its expenditure, government can do the same thing. Government can raise aggregate demand of the economy by cutting tax as well. So in this lecture, what we are going to do is we are going to talk about tax multiplier, how it works. So this is so let's go to the second slide where we will discuss this. We will discuss the the intuition behind it, how it works. So just remember the equilibrium condition here. This is the equilibrium condition as it is, as we have used it in the previous class as well. So this is why this is supply. Supply is equal to consumption, which is a function of disposable income. Disposable income is y minus t bar, and then investment expenditure, which is exogenously given, and government expenditure, which is also exogenously given. So what we are trying to analyze here, if the government decides to cuts this t bar, what will happen? See, because y minus t bar is going to increase, that will raise consumption here, right? So that will raise consumption here. If consumption increases, the right hand side, which is aggregate demand, that will increase. This AD will increase. If AD increases, then Y will increase. And then the snowballing effect will kick in. How? The second round, third round will happen. Just like the government expenditure multiplier. Remember, when Y increases, because this Y is here, this Y is here, so an increase in Y will again increase consumption here. And so aggregate demand will again increase, and then Y will increase again. So this will go on. This will go on and on and on and on until this fizzles out. I mean, as it was in the case of government expenditure multiplier. So to understand it, I mean, to make it, I mean, in a simpler terms, what we did in the case of government expenditure, let's explain it here using a numerical example. Let's MPC is equal to 0.8, as it was in the case of government expenditure multiplier. So let's see how it works. If there is a tax cut of 100 rupees, let's assume that there is a tax cut of 100 rupees. So how it's going to work? If there is a tax cut of 100 rupees, that's going to increase your YD, disposable income, by exactly 100 rupees. Why? Because you are now paying 100 rupees less tax than before. So that's going to increase your YD. What we will do, if your MPC is 0.8, you are going to increase your consumption by 0.8 of 100 rupees. That is 80 rupees. Out of your this 100 rupees increase in disposable income, you decided to consume 80 rupees more and save 20 rupees maybe. So this is the first round. If aggregate demand increases by 80 rupees, because consumption is increasing by 80 rupees, so aggregate demand will also increase by 80 rupees, then income also increases by 80 rupees in the first round. Okay, so if income increases by 80 rupees, that is 0.8 into 100, in the second round, consumption will increase by 0.8 of the first round income, first round increase in income. And so on, the same logic as it was in the case of government expenditure multiplier. Third round, it will be 0.8 into whatever the increase in income was in the second round. So if you rewrite it, then it will be equal to 0.8 into 100 plus, if you take this out, then it will be 0.8 into 100 whole into 1 plus 0.8 plus 0.8 square plus 0.8 cube dot, 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 dot. That will be exactly equal to 100 into 0.8 by, this is 100 into 0.8 by, no, this is not required. This part is not required. Okay, by 1 by 0.8, that is coming down to 4. So increase in income will be 400. Remember, there is a difference. So this is multiplier. The multiplier is here 4. So again, due to a tax cut of 100 rupees, the income is increasing by 400 rupees. So there is a multiplier effect, because 4 times the income is increasing. The government decided to cut the tax by 100 rupees, but income is increasing by 400 rupees. So there is a multiplier one. And this is the multiplier one. But remember, if you compare it with our previous example of government expenditure multiplier, in case of with the same marginal propensity to consume 0.8, in the case of government expenditure multiplier, the multiplier was 4. Now it is, sorry, the multiplier value was 5, now it is 4. So now the tax multiplier is smaller than the government expenditure multiplier. That is clear. So, and how this is, I mean, why this is happening? This is happening if you look at this logical thing, then you will understand why this is happening. In the case of government expenditure multiplier, the government expenditure is a direct aggregate demand component. It is here. So when government expenditure increases, that increases the aggregate demand by the same amount directly initially. So income increases by 100 rupees initially. Increased income. So the first round was an increase in income by 100 rupees, and then the induced effect through consumption, right? So there was a direct effect, and then there are induced effect through increase in consumption. But in this case, there is no direct effect because tax is not a direct aggregate demand component. If there is a tax cut, that's not going to increase aggregate demand directly. Why? Because tax is not a aggregate demand component in a direct sense. How the aggregate demand going to increase is only through increase in consumption. If there is a tax cut, then disposable income is increasing, and then only there will be an increase in consumption. So then only there will be an increase in consumption. So therefore you will have so there is no direct effect. These are all indirect effects. This is indirect effect because there was a tax cut of 100 rupees. So disposable income increased by 100 rupees, and then consumption increased by 0.8 into 100 rupees. So only induced effects are here. So the direct effect is missing. Because the direct effect is missing, therefore your tax multiplier, that is 4 here, is smaller than the government expenditure multiplier, which was 5, assuming MPC equal to 0.8. So let's make it let's go to the next slide to understand it more clearly. Okay, so in terms of notation, I mean, if you the multiplier, if you follow the numbers there in the earlier slide, it was 0.8 by 1 minus 0.8 into delta t bar, y was equal to that. So in terms of notation, you can write MPC by 1 minus MPC into delta t bar, or you can just replace 1 minus MPC. Instead of 1 minus MPC, you can write MPS, marginal propensity to saving. So you can write minus of MPC by MPS delta t bar. Remember, there is a difference. If you compare this with government expenditure multiplier, there is a difference. One is this term in the numerator, this additional term in the numerator. Remember, in the case of government expenditure multiplier, it was 1 by MPS into delta G bar. Here it is MPC by MPS into delta T bar, but there is a negative sign. In case of government expenditure multiplier, it was positive. There was a positive sign. Why this is negative? Negative because it works inversely. If there is a tax cut, then only there will be increase in income. So the relationship is inverse. If there is a tax cut, y will increase. So this is why this is a negative sign. Okay. If there is a tax increase, if government decides to increase tax, that's going to reduce income. So because the relationship is inverse, that's why there is a negative sign. If you ignore that negative sign, then the negative sign is just because the working of the multiplier is in inverse direction. Because tax cut is basically going to increase your disposable income, and that's going to increase income in the society. That's going to increase consumption initially, and then that's going to increase aggregate demand, and so income. So the relationship is inverse because it works in opposite direction. But if you ignore this negative sign, even then, as I have already mentioned, the value of the multiplier, just take the absolute value. Okay, the absolute value of the multiplier is smaller because there is a MPC, additional MPC component in the numerator, and as you know, MPC is greater than 0, less than 1. So because MPC is less than 1, this value is less than 1, this MPC is less than 1, then that's going to be, because MPC is less than 1, so this is smaller than the government expenditure multiplier. So in short, if you compare government expenditure multiplier with tax multiplier, they are, first of all, First of all, the sign is opposite. I mean, the sign is, in case of government expenditure multiplier, it was positive. In this case, it is negative. And in absolute value, in terms of absolute value, the government expenditure multiplier is higher than the tax multiplier. If you follow the numerical example, in our previous case, in the case of government expenditure multiplier, it was equal to 5. In this case, it is equal to 4. So this is how we derive the tax multiplier just using simple mathematics. We have done that, done the same thing in case of the government expenditure multiplier. This is the equilibrium condition, y equal to cy minus t bar plus I bar plus g. So you are differentiating it, dy equal to c prime dy, just like before. So up to this point, it's exactly the same. So, but as we are interested in this dt bar, as I told you, because we are doing comparative statics, we can't keep dt bar, di bar and dg bar all together to understand, because if you change g bar and t bar and I bar all together, everything is changing, and then what you are interested to know what is going to happen to dy, you will not be able to understand whether that change in y is because of t or I or g. So what we are doing is we are putting dg bar and di bar equal to 0. So just keeping this one. So if you do that, then 1 minus c prime dy equal to minus c prime dt bar, dy equal to minus c prime by 1 minus c prime dt bar. So minus mpc by 1 minus mpc dt bar. Just remember the last slide. It was equal to minus mpc by 1 minus mpc. Okay. So that's how you derive tax multiplier mathematically. So now we will compare. We have already compared it, but I mean, why we have already compared the government expenditure multiplier with tax multiplier. So now we have both of them together. We have both of them. Compare them, because c prime is, as I told you, because c prime is greater than 0 less than 1. So this multiplier, this is the tax multiplier. Now c prime minus c prime by 1 minus c prime. I'm taking the absolute value because there is a negative sign. So this is less than 1 by 1 minus c prime. That means this is the government expenditure multiplier which we derived earlier in the first part of our discussion. So that means tax multiplier in absolute value is less than government expenditure multiplier. Okay, so 5, it was 5 government expenditure multiplier, and this is 4, assuming MPC equal to 0.8. So that's clear. Now why this is happening? I told you that there is a direct effect, that there is in case of this government expenditure multiplier, there was a direct effect and there was an indirect effect or induced effect, but in this case, in case of tax multiplier, there is only induced effect. So let's, this is how you do. So just remember how it was, how the government expenditure multiplier was working. So change in G, that was initially delta G plus then the second round. So this is actually your direct effect. This first round effect, this is the direct one. This is direct. Okay. So whatever change in delta G is there, whatever change in government expenditure is there, initially income will increase by that particular amount, and then whole lot of induced effect. Second round, third round, fourth round, whatever you have. So this is basically delta G into plus. There will be a delta G here. There will be a delta G into MPC. So there will be a delta G bar into MPC, delta G into MPC, okay, and then delta G into MPC square, delta G into MPC cube, plus delta G into, that will be 2, there are some mistakes here, MPC to the power 4 and so on. But when you do the same thing for your tax multiplier, there is no direct component. This is nil. There is nothing here. Okay, there is nothing here. Only induced effect. How it is going to work? Whatever change in tax is there. So if there is a tax cut of delta T amount, the negative sign is for that, this inverse relationship. But whatever tax cut is there, if there is a tax cut of delta T amount, so disposable income will increase by exactly that amount. Okay, delta T bar amount, and then consumption will increase by MPC of delta T bar amount. And then in the second round, MPC square of delta T bar amount, and then MPC cube of delta T bar, and so on and so forth. So if you compare them, this change in G and change in T, you can easily see that in the first case there was a direct effect and there is an indirect effect or induced effect, you can say. But in this case, in the case of tax multiplier, we don't have a direct effect here. we only have induced effect. So naturally that effect will be greater than, because there is a direct effect here and there is no direct effect here. So the multiplier value will be greater than increase in income in this case will be greater than increase in income in the case of tax multiplier. Then so first of all, they are in terms of sign they are just opposite, and secondly tax multiplier is smaller than the government expenditure multiplier. But you can say that, okay, if I am interested to increase the income by 500 rupees, I mean, assuming MPC at 0.8, I will try to increase government expenditure at 100, but tax cut to achieve that particular target value of increase in income of 500 rupees, you can cut the tax more than 100 rupees. You can achieve that then, because the multiplier is equal to 4. So that's basically means if you cut the tax by 125 rupees, then 125 into 4, that is equal to 500. So you can increase the you can increase the income by 500 rupees by a tax cut of 125 rupees. Okay, the tax multiplier is smaller, but to achieve the same thing, same target, I mean, if your target is to increase income by 500 rupees, instead of cutting tax by 100 rupees, you'll have to cut tax by 125 rupees. So you can achieve your target by your tax by employing tax multiplier. But is there any difference? I mean, when a government should go for, I mean, is there any preference? I mean, do you prefer I mean, if you are asked that whether you are interested to go with a government expenditure multiplier or tax multiplier, what will you do? How do you answer that question? There are several things here. I mean, not just that the value of the multiplier is higher or smaller, because that is irrelevant in this case, because instead of increasing government expenditure, we can cut tax. Just the thing is that we'll have to cut tax by a little bit more amount, so that we can do. But no, there is a big difference here. Why? One thing is the question of certainty. Remember, in case of government expenditure multiplier, when you have increased government expenditure, that's going to work certainly. Why? Because G is a component in the aggregate demand. G is a aggregate demand. G is an aggregate demand component. So if you increase G, aggregate demand AD is going to increase certainly. There is no uncertainty involved here. So AD will increase certainly. Okay, there is certainty involved here. But if you cut tax, then aggregate demand will increase only if there is an increase in consumption. Why I am saying only if? Because remember, if there is a tax cut, you may decide not to increase consumption if you think, say for example, if you think that tax cut is not permanent. Say the government decided to cut tax by some amount, but you are thinking, when you are taking decision regarding whether you are going to increase consumption or you are going to save that additional money, you may try to understand whether this tax cut is permanent, that is whether the government will keep that tax cut scheme in the next year or not. Maybe if you feel that this tax cut is just for this year, then maybe you are not going to increase your consumption, because next year you will not get that additional benefit, so you don't want to change your consumption habit. So in that case, you may decide to save more instead of consume more, or maybe you may decide to increase consumption by only a little amount, but you are going to increase your savings. So if you do that, then the tax multiplier is not going to work perfectly. So there is certainty involved, because whether this tax cut will increase consumption or not, that will be determined by what the consumers are thinking about this tax cut. If they feel that this tax cut is temporary, that's not going to sustain, the government is going to withdraw that tax cut scheme in the next year or next year, then they are not going to increase consumption. They may prefer to increase save. They will save more. So if they don't want to, if they are not going to increase consumption, then how the aggregate demand is going to increase? all the policies are going to work only if there is an increase in aggregate demand. So if there is uncertainty about increase in consumption, that means there is uncertainty about aggregate demand, increase in aggregate demand. So you never know whether the tax cut is going to work or not, or how far it will work. I mean, whether it is going to work, or I mean, what would be the extent of that policy impact. So there is uncertainty involved. And second is, it's a political economic consideration. That's a role of government, the question of role of government, because remember, those two policies, I mean, in terms of numerical values, I mean, if you just ignore the uncertainty question for a few moments, and if you compare them, then they looks similar. Just because it's going to increase your aggregate demand, a tax cut is also going to increase your aggregate demand, but there is a big difference. Remember, when you are increasing government expenditure, you are actually increasing the government's involvement in the economy, because government is more into the economic activities. You are increasing your expenditure. When you are increasing, the government is increasing its expenditure. That means the government is more into the economic activities, more involved in economic activities. But when the government is cutting tax, that means government is actually withdrawing from economic activities, because it is not, it doesn't want to involved in economic activity. So there is a big difference between a tax cut and a government expenditure increase. In case of government expenditure increase, this is more like those who are in favor of more and more government intervention in economic activities. But if you feel that if a government is like this, I mean, if a government is who is more market oriented, who prefers more market involvement, so it will decide to go for, it will decide this policy, it will take this policy, tax cut policy, because that's going to, there is a big political economy difference here. I mean, here we are talking about a government where the government is more and more interested, more and more involved in the economy. A tax cut is just doing the opposite thing. If the government is actually I mean, reducing or actually withdrawing from the economic activities, and so this is, there is a difference. So there is a question of certainty, and there is a question of how the policymakers are perceiving the role of government. Okay, so this is how we compare government expenditure multiplier, because in this model if you think about the government, it has got two alternative policy options. One is it can raise expenditure and thereby increase aggregate demand, and another one was by cutting tax, it can raise aggregate demand. So we compared their values, we compared their how they work, and we compared their efficiencies, their certainty, and their political economic question as well. So this is actually we have done the comparison. Now next, what we will do is, what if the government decides to do both? Maybe we have not answered the question. I mean, when we talked about increase in expenditure, from where they are getting the money? এই যে গভর্নমেন্ট এক্সপেন্ডিচারটা বাড়াচ্ছে, তার টাকাটা কোথা থেকে আসছে? যখন আমরা কিছু বলিনি, তার মানে আমরা অ্যাকচুয়ালি ডেফিসিট ফিনান্সিং এর কথা বলেছি, হয়তো বড় করেছে বা কিছু করেছে, সেটা আমরা পরের ক্লাসে আলোচনা করব। বাট যদি এটা করে যে পরিমাণ গভর্নমেন্ট এক্সপেন্ডিচার বাড়ালো, এই যে জি বাড়ালো 100 রুপিস যেটা বলেছিলাম, সেই টাকাটা যদি ট্যাক্স ইনক্রিজ করে, ট্যাক্স কাটের জায়গায় ট্যাক্স ইনক্রিজ করে তুলে নিল, মানে গভর্নমেন্ট যেটা করলো, এরকম একটা সিচুয়েশন আমরা কল্পনা করতে পারি যে গভর্নমেন্ট ওয়ান্টেড টু ইনক্রিজ অর ডিসাইডেড টু ইনক্রিজ এক্সপেন্ডিচার বাই 100 rupees, but that 100 rupees is coming from a tax increase of 100 rupees. Then what is going to happen? This we are going to discuss what is called BBM, Balanced Budget Multiplier. অর্থাৎ আমরা ব্যালেন্স করে দিচ্ছি বাজেটটাকে, আমরা যতটা এক্সপেন্ডিচার বাড়িয়েছি ঠিক ততটা পরিমাণ ট্যাক্স বাড়িয়ে টাকাটাকে তুলে নিয়েছি। তাহলে কি হবে সেটা আমরা পরের ক্লাসে ডিসকাস করব, নেক্সট ক্লাস। ওকে, for the moment, go through the slides carefully, and And if you have any question, just get back to me.